Great, so a very warm welcome, especially if it's your first time here. Hope you had a good meditation next door. And if it is your first time here, you've come at a good time because we've got our first of our special guests in March, Padmasagara here. What to say? Yeah, so Padmasagara lives and works in a place called Padmaloka in the UK, which is a kind of semi-monastic community retreat centre. And, well, his main role is to train men for ordination into this particular tradition, yeah? But in a way, I mean, after speaking to him a bit, in a way his kind of life is about friendship, really, yeah? Or at least that's how you put it to me, yeah? It's kind of about friendship. And friendship seems to have been the kind of theme here, in a way, for the past few weeks, starting with Padmasagara's fantastic talk about about friendship, which I felt kind of moved and honoured to be part of, especially the opera section. Don't worry, maybe I'll say a bit more in a minute. But yeah, so in a way, I just like to rejoice in a few qualities of Padmasagara's. Yeah, so I think starting with friendship, I would say Padmasagara knows how to be a friend. Yeah. For example, when I moved here from Padmaloka, I used to live there, it was like he made a real conscious effort to maintain our friendship, you know. He said, all right, let's talk every week, and, you know, like actually keep the whole thing alive. And it's happened over the course of like 5 years, which I think was largely your sort of imperative, kind of, anyway. And yeah, he's just a very good person to be with, yeah. I mean, when you spend time with him, or at least my experience is, I kind of tend to feel calmer and yet more energized, yeah. He has a very good presence in that way. Talking of friendship, I have to say, just as a slight aside, we had a team meeting this morning, and I went to the toilet, and then I washed my hands, and I looked in the mirror, and my hair was ridiculous. It was like, it looked like a duck's bum, right? Because I had a woolly hat on with wet hair, and I'm quite vain, yeah? And I was just like, oh my God, it's a catastrophe. And Padmasagara came to the rescue, we put water on it. So it kind of went a bit too much to one side, and he was like, no, you look like Hitler. And I was like, oh God. And then he said, no, you look like a K-pop band. I was like, I give up. But that was an act of friendship anyway. I just wanted to rejoice in Padmasagara saving my vain self, yeah? So that was very much appreciated. But anyway, back to Padmasagara. He's someone with real integrity. That's what I'd say. Yeah, someone who kind of you can trust his word, and he's got real depth of practice. Yeah, yeah. He really lives this. And maybe the last thing to say is just creativity. Yeah, he's a very creative person. It's quite interesting being in a position where you're upholding a tradition, so to speak. Yeah. You could get into a kind of dogmatic rites and rituals type situation, but he's very much not like that at all. Yeah, he's very creative in the way he communicates the Dharma, communicates Buddhism, and yeah, just creative in keeping the structures kind of working but fresh, yeah, alive to what's alive. And maybe I'll just finish by saying he comes from a long line of like sailors, yeah, a whole fishing community in the north of England. And it seems to be really part of his psyche. And he was given the name Padmasagara, and actually Padmasagara means ocean of lotuses, which I thought, wow, what a perfect name. Anyway, and yeah, I'm just very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. So, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Tarapalita, and thank you all for having me. It's a few times that I've been here to speak now over the years since Tarapalita moved to Berlin, and I think each time it does happen that there are more and more people here. I don't think that is to do with me and my popularity. I think it's more to do with what's happening here on an ongoing basis. So yeah, great to see you all and have the opportunity to speak to you all this morning. I do have a title for this talk. I very rarely come up with titles, but I wanted to speak this morning on the theme of waking up in the dark. Waking up in the dark, which I thought was quite an intriguing title to have for a talk. But I have to be honest and say that in the journey here on Thursday, I suddenly realized that I wasn't going to be able to speak about the theme that I'd thought I would speak about. and had to think again. So this is a new talk, concocted in the last couple of days. But funnily enough, the title, Waking Up in the Dark, still works. I'm not going to explain how and why. You can just listen to the talk and see how it works yourself, or if it works. That's up to you. But waking up in the dark. And the first thing I want to talk about is a dream. And it's not a dream of my own, it's a dream that a friend of mine had, I think several years ago now. I remember being on a walk with him and he was describing this dream to me. It's a friend of mine, Arta Priya, who is a senior member of the Triratna Buddhist order. Actually, he ordained me in the sense that he was the one who put this kesa around my neck for the first time. So he's a very good friend and occupies a very prominent position kind of in my mind. And anyway, he described to me this dream that he had a few years ago, where he was at a place called Guhya Loka, which is one of our retreat centres in Spain, up in the mountains in Spain. And me and Tarapalita were ordained there together in 2016. And Guhya Loka is quite a magical place. It means secret valley. Guhya Loka is the secret valley. And it's very mountainous and rocky, and all the rock formations look like different animals and creatures and dinosaurs and that kind of thing. And one of the biggest and most characteristic of these rock formations we call the whale, because it looks like a huge whale kind of rising up out of the waters. That's everybody sees it like that, not just me because of my lineage of sailors that Tarapalita just mentioned. So we all know it as the whale. And Arta Priya had this dream where he was on top of the whale, and he was there with Sangharakshita. So Sangharakshita was his preceptor, the man who ordained him. And actually it was Sangharakshita who founded the Triratna Buddhist order and community in the late 1960s. So Arta Priya and Sangharakshita were stood together on this big rocky formation called the whale in the dream, wearing blue robes. So order members don't wear robes, we just have these cases, but we do wear robes for significant retreats and occasions, and the Guhya Loka ordination retreats is one of those occasions. So him and Arta Priya and Sangharakshita were both on the whale in their robes, and Arta Priya was describing how in the dream he was just very happy. He's happy to be there with his teacher, happy to be talking. They were in conversation, and then all of a sudden Sangharakshita grabbed him by the robe and threw him off. And Arta Priya's flying through the air, and then as he's about to hit the ground, he wakes up in the dark. So he's in the dark in the sense that he's woken up in the middle of the night, but also in the sense that he's puzzled. Why has his wise, kind teacher and friend thrown him off the top of this cliff? And I remember him describing the dream to me as we were having this walk, and you could tell he was really confused by it. He said, I just keep reflecting, why did he throw me off the top of the whale? Anyway, that was a few years ago that he had this dream, and then a few weeks ago, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was sat in meditation at home at Padmasagara where I live, and I reached a certain stillness in the meditation. I was just meditating away, sitting there, and all of a sudden the memory of this dream just came into my mind, and I could see the image of Arta Priya and Sangharakshita on the top of the whale. And as often happens when you visualize things and see images in your mind, it began to change and morph into something else. And suddenly I was there on top of the whale in the blue robe with Arta Priya. Sangharakshita had gone. So there was me and Arta Priya stood there, and I was pleased. I was there with somebody I regard as my friend and my teacher. And then, all of a sudden, I grabbed him by the robe and I threw him off. You might have expected him to do the same to me, but no, I grabbed him and I threw him off. So of course I kind of came out of the meditation, what am I doing? Why am I having this vision of throwing my wise, kind teacher and friend off the top of the cliff? So just as he's been puzzled and confused for years, now I'm a bit puzzled and confused. What is going on there. So I've been reflecting on that for the last few weeks, and I'll share a few of my thoughts about what all this means shortly. But in the course of those reflections over the last couple of weeks, one thing that has come to mind for me, I think it was sparked off by the fact that Artapriya had this dream, is a dream that is described in one of the Buddhist sutras, so one of the Buddhist texts known as sutras. And this sutra is the Suvarna Bhosottama Sutra, so the Sutra of Golden Light. And in this sutra, the main kind of figure in the sutra is a bodhisattva, so a very advanced Buddhist practitioner called Ruchiraketu. And Ruchiraketu means something like beautiful comet. So that was his name. He was obviously a bit of a high flyer, very bright individual. So Ruchiraketu. But Ruchiraketu, he's got this problem. So he can't understand why it was that the Buddha only lived until he was 80 years old. So the Buddha is a historical figure. We know that he lived into his 80s before he died. And he can't understand why the Buddha would die so young. It might not sound like that to us, but his problem is, why did the Buddha die at 80? Because according to his worldview, two of the things that conduced to long life were not harming other living creatures and being generous, so particularly giving away food. So not harming living creatures and giving away food would lead to long life. Also part of Ruchiraketu's mythology, his worldview, was that to become a Buddha, you had to have lived countless lives beforehand. So countless means you can't count them, there are so many. So the Buddha must have lived countless lives before he became a Buddha. If he was doing that, if he lived all those lives and he was being kind and he was being generous, that would mean surely that the Buddha would live for millions of years, not 80. So he's got this real problem. It's not a problem for us, is it? You know, the fact that a man lives till he's 80 and then dies, it's all very straightforward. But for him, this is a real problem. So he's there kind of confused, turning this problem over in his mind, when all of a sudden, the walls of the room that he's in begin to expand. So they get further and further away. And as they're expanding, they turn into the precious substance beryl, which is kind of luminous and glowing. So the walls kind of turn into light and they're expanding more and more fully, creating this huge space. And in the four corners of the room, there are 4 lotuses that appear. Again, huge lotuses, bright, colourful, glowing. And on each of the lotuses, there's a Buddha. So 4 Buddhas, and each of them a different colour. So there's a yellow Buddha, a red Buddha, a blue Buddha, and a green Buddha. And the city around him, Rajgriha, is suddenly blessed by light. So it's blessed in the sense that everybody becomes happy. Everybody who's sick becomes healthy. Everybody who is poor becomes rich. Everybody who's hungry is fed. So the whole experience seems to be transforming the world around him. But for Ruchiraketu, he's having this kind of visionary experience, and then he remembers his problem. So it's all really great, but he's thinking, yeah, but still the Buddha died when he was 80, and what's that all about? And the 4 Buddhas in the 4 corners of the expanded room, they intuit, they perceive that Ruchiraketu is turning this problem over in his mind. And they all simultaneously tell him, Ruchiraketu, the Buddha did not live until he was 80 years old. Said, in fact, the Buddha, his lifespan is incalculable. You can't say that the Buddha only lived for 80 years. In fact, he's lived as long as you could ever imagine. And he didn't die, he'll just live as long as you can ever imagine. So they're communicating something different to Ruchiraketu, and this hits him like a revelation. It's like, the Buddha is something other than I thought he was. He's not just a man who lived to 80 and became a great teacher, There's something else, something more mysterious. So it hits him like a revelation. But then what happens is Ruchiraketu lies down on the floor and he just falls into a deep sleep. And in this deep sleep, he has a dream. And in the dream, there's just this huge, vast expanse of blue sky. And in the center of the blue sky, suspended, there's an enormous golden drum. And the drum is pounding, as drums do. Boom, boom, boom. And out of the drum, golden light is pouring. So it's like this drum is a huge sun with light pouring out of it. And actually there's a Brahmin, a kind of shaman, hitting the drum, just repetitively beating the drum. And it's as if the drum and the sound of the drum and the light coming from the drum is reality itself. Whatever reality is in its mysterious depths and its fullness, somehow that is being emitted, pulsating, radiating from this golden drum, suspended in Ruchiraketu's dream. And it's said in the sutra that the whole of the rest of the sutra comes out of the drum, comes out of the sound of the drum. It's a very weird text. If that's just the beginning, and then the whole thing unfolds from this dream of Ruchiraketu. Have a look at it if you're interested. So I don't know what you make of that, this, first of all, Ruchiraketu's problem, his vision, and his dream. You might be surprised to hear this kind of thing, because often we get presentations of Buddhism that are very rational and straightforward. So it's one of the attractions, isn't it, about Buddhism, that it's practical. You can come to a Buddhist center, you can learn meditation, you can learn about the ethical precepts, you can immediately start to practice that in your life, and you can, test whether it works, and then get on with it or leave it behind and move on to something else. So you don't have to believe anything in Buddhism. You can just start doing it and see what happens. So it is very practical, and a lot of Buddhist texts, particularly the early texts, have a very practical kind of presentation. But we do get in those early texts as well, and later it gets more and more developed in Buddhist history, more of an emphasis on things like images. So images like the one we have on the wall there of a bodhisattva called Avalokiteshvara. He's got 1,000 arms and 11 heads. We get images like this one of the Buddha, so bright gold, obviously not just communicating an image of a human being that we might see in front of us, but there's something different and special about the Buddha, hence him being gold. So we get the development in Buddhist history of a whole mythology. So images, symbols, stories, poetry, even in well-developed cultures, song, dance. Very nice to hear that Dharmasara spoke about opera. We would have had Buddhist opera in a sense, Buddhist song, Buddhist dance in traditional Buddhist cultures. And all this is really, really important because Buddhism acknowledges that human beings are not just rational thinking beings. So of course we can think, we can reason, and that's really important, isn't it? Because if we were just irrational, we'd just be making a complete mess all the time. We have to be able to think clearly, but we're more than that. So Buddhism says we're more than that. We're more than just our thought patterns and our ideas. We know that, don't we? If you've had a dream, for example, you know that there's more going on than thought. So Buddhism acknowledges that and tries to speak to that. So not just appealing to your reason with practical advice and teachings, but trying to appeal to, if you like, your heart, appeal to the emotions, appeal to your imagination and the depths. So Buddhism uses language of the depths. That's what's happening in this sutra of golden light, Ruchiraketu's dream. All this business about the walls expanding, Buddhas appearing, drums in the sky. If we just take that rationally, it's stupid, isn't it? It doesn't sort of make any sense, doesn't say anything. But if we allow that into our heart, if we allow that into our imagination, maybe when I was describing it, it was doing something. Maybe you couldn't put into words, or you didn't even notice. But probably that image has sunk in somewhere into, if you like, our unconscious depths, into the depths of ourselves. So Buddhism always is trying to address the whole of us, trying to address those depths. Not just Buddhism, so we've got a whole Western tradition of that. If we go all the way back to the Greeks, the ancient Greeks with somebody like Socrates, Socrates said, "Wisest is he who knows nothing." So there's a knowledge there, but it's a knowledge of the limits of reason, the limits of thinking. So wisdom then stretches beyond our capacity just to think and reason. From Socrates we get Plato, we get the whole Neoplatonic tradition, we get the Renaissance. There's a thread of this throughout our Western culture and history, the importance of, let's say, the imagination. You get into the late kind of 18th century, early 19th century, and you get the kind of romantic poets and the kickback against an increasingly rational and materialistic way of thinking about the world. So somebody like William Blake, the English poet and artist, I mean, he had a whole system of what a human being was to emphasize the point that a human is more than just reason and the thinking mind. So he would speak about, we have reason, which he called spectre, but we also have emotion, which he called emanation, which was kind of the split off emotional feminine nature of a human being or a human spirit. Then you had shadow, which to him was the kind of suppressed desires. And you also had what he called sleeping humanity. So the sleeping humanity was the imagination, that which, if you like, is deepest in ourselves. And he could see in the world that he was inhabiting that was getting lost. So things were getting more and more based upon reason and thinking, and the imagination was sinking. He has a brilliant image of a figure in his mythology, Urizen, which is reason, represents reason. And Urizen is sinking in the sea of materialism. And he's just kind of trying to gulp for breath, submerged in water. So he's making the point that stop getting carried away with thinking and reason. There's more to us than that. So he's trying to bring that out. So we have this whole tradition in the West of trying to speak to the depths, speak to more than just reason, speak the language of emotion and the language of imagination. So all of that, I think, is very important. And for us, we're in a very interesting position because, if you like, we're inheriting that Western lineage, or it's there for us. I would say that for a lot of us, our culture is still very materialistic. Sometimes it appears to be getting more and more so. Very much based on thinking and reason. But we do have this Western cultural heritage. And we've come into contact with Buddhism. So we're here in a Buddhist centre, but if you like, it's a Western Buddhist centre. It's planted in the soil of Western culture. So we're inheriting an Eastern tradition and a Western culture, or trying to resurrect a kind of Western culture, and somehow navigate our way in this increasingly materialistic, consumerist environment. That's quite a challenge, isn't it? But hopefully a lot of you are up for the challenge. You know, in a way, maybe you're here because you felt that there's something lacking in the world in which you find yourselves, or in the way in which we relate to the world in which we find ourselves. So maybe trying to pick up on this, or draw out these other aspects of ourselves, would be one place to start, or one tool that we could use to live more and more fulfilling, meaningful lives. So if we accept that perspective, you're quite free to argue against me, and not now, but later over lunch. If we accept that perspective that we're not just reason and thinking, that we also have these other aspects to ourselves, I think we can really make a start in terms of exploring Buddhism more deeply. Because the Buddha himself said that, well, the Buddha was enlightened, so he became an enlightened being. That's what the gold colour is all about. He wasn't just an ordinary human being. Didn't have just an ordinary consciousness. Something else was going on. But when he tried to communicate that to others or describe it to others, he said that reason alone is not enough to see what I've seen. We have to engage those other parts of ourselves. So if we can accept this, then we can start more deeply exploring Buddhism. But also if we accept that, other things start to become more and more important to us, or we begin to relate to things in a different kind of way. So things like images. We might come into this room and not really respond to these things, but if we can at least know what language they're trying to speak, that they're not trying to speak to our reason, we can sort of disengage that a little bit and try to listen, let's say with the heart, or listen with the imagination. The other thing that becomes more important to us, or can become more important to us, is our dream life. So our dreams, if we are relating to them in terms of imagination, in terms of emotion, not just reason, then dreams can become more important. So if we just take dreams from a rational perspective, well, it's just chemical activity in the brain. It's just, if we have a nightmare, well, maybe it's because we ate cheese the night before. That's something my grandma always used to say, that if you eat cheese before bed, you get nightmares. We might just dismiss the dreams as kind of a way in which the brain processes all the information that we've had in the last couple of days. And maybe there is a component of that to dreams. But sometimes we have dreams that seem bigger than that, don't we? So we might have a dream that seems, it affects us. It affects us in such a way that it can't just be something chemical and automatic happening in the brain. Something bigger seems to be getting communicated through the dream. It can confuse us. It can excite us. It can fascinate us. So dreams can become, let's say, a doorway into deeper meaning. Just as images and poetry and song are kind of doorways into deeper meaning. Of course, concepts and thinking, that's also a doorway into deeper meaning. But I think we need more than one door. So dreams, images can become doorways into deeper meaning. So that's what's going on in the Sutra of Golden Light with Ruchiraketu. So if you think about it, Ruchiraketu's problem is that he's trying to think his way out of the problem, but he can't do that. His reason will only take him so far. How come the Buddha lives only till he's 80, when I also have this other thought that you live a really long life, probably millions of years, if you were to give food all the time and not cause harm over countless lifetimes. It's like his two ideas, which might be very useful ideas on their own, they don't sort of fit. So in order to really understand it, he has to go to a higher level, or a deeper level, whatever metaphor you want to choose. And that's what the image of the walls expanding and Buddhas appearing seems to be getting at. It's like, this isn't just ordinary thinking that's happening for Ruchiraketu. He's kind of gone up a level. Or by stretching his thought as far as it can go, something else is starting to take over. So he's going into a different way of perceiving, a different way of relating to the world. He's using his imagination, we could say, and therefore a kind of deeper truth can reveal itself. So I think that's what's happening in Ruchiraketu's dream. Also, I think we can look at this dream of Artapriya's and Sangharakshita. I know you said him throwing Sangharakshita off, but that's another permutation that could have happened. So who was it? Sangharakshita threw him off. And then my own kind of meditative experience of this vision of me throwing him off. Obviously, if we take that literally, it's horrible, isn't it? Well, like Artapriya, it just becomes confused by what's going on there, and for myself becoming confused. So let's just reflect, or I'm going to share my reflections on this particular dream of Artapriya's and try to read it in such a way as maybe it's a doorway into deeper meaning for us, or a deeper sense of what Buddhism is and how to practice it. So, let me just remind myself. Yeah, so first of all, as I do this, bear in mind it's not explanation. So the word explain, I found out recently, means to lay things flat, literally. So if we're trying to explain something, we're laying it flat. You can't lay a dream flat, can you? You can't even, it's not even anywhere to be seen, so you can't do that. So it's not explanation, this is just, this is exploration. Dreams have multiple meanings, and I'm not trying to, I think that's one of the problems if we relate to them literally. We just kind of condense them or pin them down and lose the deeper significance. But anyway, let's try and explore this dream together. So I think the first thing that seems significant to me is the fact that it happens, like I say, at Guhyaloka, in this secret valley, this kind of magical place. It's a bit like the walls expanding and turning into light. You're opening up into this vista of those amazing southern Spanish blue skies, all these amazing historic ancient rock formations. It's kind of an archetypal landscape. In a way, I feel the privilege of just being able to sit at the front of a room and tell you what I've been thinking for the last few weeks and experiencing. So I don't really regard myself as a teacher, it's more that I want to share. So it's much more in the spirit of friendship. But of course, friendship does have dynamics, and we do have friends who know more than we do about certain things. So coming along to a Buddhist centre, you'll meet people who've been doing this a while, or who have particular gifts in a particular area. So we do learn from people. But it's not a kind of formalized teacher-student dynamic. I think it's more than that. I think it's richer than that. And I think friendship is a better way of putting it. Or another way of talking would be in terms of guides. So we need a guide, don't we, to explore something that we've not explored before. When I first came along to a Buddhist centre, I had this idea that I didn't want to join the Buddhists. I just wanted to come along, get some information about what they do, and then I would incorporate that in my own version of spiritual life. I knew I wanted to live more of a spiritual life, whatever that meant to me then. But I wanted it to be my own, I didn't want to get fooled by the Buddhists and join the group. I was quite clear about that. It's funny, isn't it? You've got to be careful, because here I am all these years later. But I was quite clear. I wanted things from people, but I didn't really need anything beyond a certain point. It just hasn't turned out like that. I think with anything, if you want to learn it well, you do need a guide, and you do need to commit to it. Sangharakshita once used this metaphor of sending a bucket down a well. He said, if you've got 10 wells and you send the bucket down part of the way, you won't get any water. If you just go to one well and you send the bucket all the way down, then you'll get the water that you need. And I like that. It doesn't mean that we have to cut off anything else other than Buddhism or other than Triratna Buddhism. I've got other interests. I've talked about William Blake, for example, and blah, blah, blah. So it's not that you don't have other interests, but what are you committing to? What are you going to make central in whatever it is you feel like you need to explore? And I think it's really important that we do that we shop around a bit, whatever it is you're looking for, whether it's how to meditate, whether it's what Buddhism's all around. You can look around, try different things, but at some point, if you want to go deep, you do need to commit to that. In a sense, what you need is a teacher or a guide who's walked a particular path. So I think that's been communicated in the dream, the fact that we've got this teacher or guide or friend, and if you like another controversial word, his disciple. So the person who's learning from him. That word can have connotations, can't it? Particularly to do with Christianity that some of us might not find helpful. But traditionally it just meant learning a discipline from someone who was more experienced. So we get that symbolism in the dream. What is shocking though is that then the teacher throws the student off the cliff. So why does that happen? Why does the wise and kind teacher chuck Artapriya off the cliff? So the way I relate to this, or the way I've been reflecting on this, is that obviously we're not taking it literally, but imaginatively, how do we relate to that? And I think that that seems to be communicating to me that we can have a guide, and the guide can show us things, but ultimately we have to do something for ourselves. So we might think that having a guide means that if they're always there, everything will be okay for me. But the teacher, the guide, the spiritual friend is not a refuge. We can't rely on them, can we? Because you could meet someone and think, okay, I can really learn from this person, and then they might decide actually they're going to move to England or something, and then you're left. Or they get sick and they can't give you the attention anymore that you need, or they die. So we can't turn another person into a refuge and just assume that they're always going to be there and they're always going to be able to help us with our mess or with whatever it is that we feel we need. So we can't turn them into a refuge. So I read Sangharakshita throwing Artapriya off the cliff as, in a sense, throwing off his idea of a teacher being a refuge. So he's throwing Artapriya into, I don't know what Artapriya would make of all this. He's throwing Artapriya into, let's call it, individuality. So if we want to practice Buddhism, we need to be an individual. That's one way of looking at what the Buddhist path is. It's about emerging more and more fully as an individual. And what a teacher really is in a Buddhist sense, what a guide is somebody who can help you emerge as an individual, help you emerge as being independent of them. So great teachers make themselves irrelevant. Great teachers make themselves obsolete and no longer required. So if you have a teacher that's helping you emerge, ultimately, in a sense, they're going to throw you off in the end and say, go on, you can do it. It's encouraging. It's not, they're not killing you. They trust that you've done the training, you've committed to the training, and that now you can stand on your own 2 feet. So a great Buddhist teacher will help you develop your individuality. What that means, of course, is becoming more aware, becoming more emotionally positive, being able to make your own decisions, not be dependent upon other people for your emotional support, being creative, being willing to go it alone. Sometimes in spiritual life, in the Buddhist life, we need to be the person who says, actually, no, I think it's like this, even when everybody else is saying something else. Are we willing to be alone? Sometimes we might have to risk being unpopular. But all of these things can emerge from a commitment to a Buddhist training. and through guidance we become more and more individual. That's not individualistic. There's a difference. So it's not that we become individualistic and self-contained and selfish. Actually, Sangharakshita once said that it's only an individual that can be a genuine friend. So it's only individuals who can come together in genuine friendship, because they don't expect things from the other person. They're not dependent upon other people. They respect the other person as an emerging individual. What's fantastic in friendship, in a sangha like this, in a community like this, is that you and your friend, they could be your best friend, you can become less and less like each other. You know, you can go off in completely different directions, and yet the friendship gets stronger and stronger. So it's not a friendship based upon liking the same music or eating the same food. It's a friendship based upon respecting and cherishing each other's individuality. So I see the symbolism of the teacher throwing the disciple off the cliff as, symbolic of the emergence of individuality. Then we get the fact that he's plunging through space, having been thrown off the cliff. So what's that all about? Well, it can feel like that sometimes. A few laughs in the room. So, I mean, we come along, don't we, to a Buddhist centre, and we hear talks and we read the books, and it all sounds so straightforward. So you do this, and then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then enlightenment. No more suffering, freedom. It sounds so good and so clean and straightforward. That has not been my experience of being a Buddhist over the last however many years. Sangharakshita once in a poem, he wrote that the way, as in the Buddhist path, the way is a hacked path, roughly made through the densest jungle, deep into the unknown. And later he says that man through the hideous dark must plunge alone. I don't want to put anybody off, but it can feel a bit like that sometimes. You know, if we are emerging as individuals, it means leaving behind old habits. It means leaving behind the ways in which the strategies we've devised to secure ourselves in our lives. We've got to kind of shed those. They're kind of holding us back and keeping us limited. But in that opening up to something more true, it can feel very much like going into the dark. We don't know what's on the other side of this particular limitation that we've got, because we're boundaried within it. If we open up, it's a bit like waking up in the dark. See, it does work. The title does work. It's a bit like waking up in the dark, or definitely moving into the unknown, or jumping off into space. So I think it's more like that than this nice, straightforward. You might be one of the lucky ones. The Buddha once said that for some people it's easy in the beginning, it's easy in the middle, and it's easy at the end. He also said every other permutation of that, it could be easy in the beginning, but difficult in the middle and difficult in the end. It could be difficult all the way through. But everybody has the potential to awaken and to leave all limitations behind. So strong symbolism, I think, in this getting thrown into space. We don't know. We don't even have a parachute. We might never even hit the ground. We don't even know that there is a ground. We're just moving into the unknown. So that, I think, is being brought out in the dream there. So I'll just say a few words as well about my own vision with a small v. I wouldn't say it was a great visionary experience, but this emerging image in meditation of myself throwing Artapriya. I don't know what Artapriya's done to keep getting thrown off a cliff, but what do I read into my own kind of vision, to call it that, of throwing Artapriya off the whale? Well, it was a surprise to me. Like I said, it might have been that I expected him to throw me off, because that's what had happened before, hadn't it, in the way Artapriya told his dream. But actually, me throwing him off was a surprise. In fact, I was sat there meditating and this image came up. And it's like, oh, Artapriya's there and I'm on the whale, and then suddenly I've grabbed him and thrown him off. And the first thing I did was kind of recoil. Like, oh! You know, when you have experiences of imagination, you get so absorbed in them, don't you, that it feels real. And it felt real, and I was like, ooh. So I think what I draw from this or see in this is the fact that we do have the capacity to surprise ourselves. To go back to Blake and his vision of the human being, I said, didn't I, he had the shadow aspect, and that gets taken up by people like Carl Jung, and the sense of one having a shadow, the kind of things in the unconscious that we don't fully acknowledge. And I think one of the things about practicing Buddhism is that we get to know ourselves more, and that means we get to know also our own shadow, to call it that. It's not traditional Buddhist language, but we get to know those parts of ourselves that we sort of habitually ignore or try to keep at arm's length. We might not even know we're doing it. So, example, you come to learn to meditate, and you sit down and someone says, okay, bring your awareness to your breath, and you do that, and then before you've counted to 2, you're off somewhere. So you come back, 1, 2, and you're off somewhere. And it's like, for myself, I'd never realized how distracted I got. I thought I was not a distracted person, and then I tried to learn to meditate, and it was impossible to count to 10 breathing. I remember one day being in the shower. I was just wondering whether to share that detail or not, but I was in the shower. Anyway, maybe the details are important sometimes. And I suddenly realized I talk to myself all the time. You know, there's like running commentary on my life all the time. But it's through meditation, isn't it, that we can get a kind of gap in that commentary, enough to start exploring, well, what's life like outside of what I think it is? You know, just reason and thinking. There's more going on. Or we learn the metta bhavana. We sit down, we think we're a quite nice person. We bring to mind our friend and we think, I'm really annoyed by something that they've done. Or we realize that, we do have enemies. We try to bring loving awareness to somebody, and actually we're just not that bothered. We're not that interested in them. So we begin to see what our emotional life is actually like, the complexity of it, the complexity of our responses to other people, the complexity of our response to ourselves. Sometimes that can hit us, can't it? So all of that can be a bit of a shock, and yet it's all perfectly normal. It's in the nature of being a human being to think and reflect, and then probably overthink and get lost in thought and distraction and create all these weird stories that have nothing to do with what's actually going on. That is human, and we all do it. It's also normal to dislike people. You know, we've evolved over however many millions of years to maintain our species in existence, and that's required a lot of kind of violence, for want of a better word. So of course there are traces of that in our psychology. Of course there are people we think are threatening and we don't like and we want to get rid of. Of course we can have a complex about ourselves and all these conditionings that we've had just in this lifetime as we've tried to make our way through an insecure world. It's all perfectly normal. What we need to avoid is justifying it as, oh, well, I'm just like that, or, well, of course I dislike that person, he does this, this, this and this, he's got these terrible habits. That's justification, but that's just another story that's going on and distracting us from the reality. So we don't justify, but we don't judge in the sense of condemning ourselves. We recognize, no, this is just human. This is unenlightened humanity, and I'm going to keep practicing to open something else up, to be an individual, to be creative, to relate to others as individuals. So although we might surprise ourselves, we might find that there are, let's say, shadow aspects to our nature, that doesn't define us. We can create ourselves. We keep creating ourselves through our practice. And I think what opens up in that sense is that there's more to us than we think in the best sense. So just as we might discover things, truths about ourselves we don't really want to face and don't like, we might also discover that we've got gifts and talents and capacities that we didn't think we would ever have. That could be all kinds of things. The fact that you might fear the thought of speaking in public, and yet in 10 years' time you might find yourself sat at the front of a Buddhist centre with a case around your neck talking quite enjoyably. It might be that you respond to somebody when they're sick, and on reflection you think, wow, I didn't think I was that kind of kind person, but actually I do care for other people. So we can surprise ourselves in all kinds of ways. We're much, Sangharakshita once said this, I'm much worse than people think I am, and much better. The spectrum upon which we could live is vast. That's what this is all about. That's what these images are all about. This isn't something other than you. This is you. If you jump off the cliff, like, not literally, but if you, metaphorically speaking, jump off the cliff, if you find a guide or guides, if you make spiritual friends, if you put their teaching into practice and become an individual, if you are willing to go into the unknown, you can become what this is pointing to. So what this is pointing to is another jump off the cliff, but at least it's giving us a hint. So all of us can do that. We will surprise ourselves, I think, but it will be, I'm sure, a strange and interesting journey. And I think one thing is for sure, that we can't just make that journey with reason and with thought. We do need to engage the heart. We need to engage our imaginations in order to do that. So I'll finish there. I hope those reflections have been of interest. And thank you very much for letting me speak.